a question in the chat. You can also raise your hand, and Minnie has kindly offered to allow some time between different topics for you to jump in and ask a question. So when it comes to that, just feel free to unmute yourself and then ask your question. We purposefully tried to keep this group as small as possible. We do not want 50 members in a webinar just like that. I think that we lose the value in that. So we're trying to make it as interactive as possible. So again, try to make the most out of this 1 hour. Right. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Minnie Nambiar for tonight's webinar called Grid Unlocked. She is the Technical Innovation Manager at SSEN Transmission. It's quite interesting how I met Minnie. I met her through Toastmasters chapter here in Aberdeen, and she's an absolutely phenomenal and inspirational person for me. She got her bachelor's in electrical and electronics engineering, started her career in Taiwan for a hardware company or in the hardware industry, moved along in the consumer industry, and then worked for a bit in oil and gas and defense and now renewables. She also has a master's in subsea engineering. As you may know, renewables is, or the demand for grid transformation is of utmost importance to the UK's energy fabric. And I'm beyond proud to welcome Minnie to share what she has to share with us. So over to you, Minnie.
Thank you very much, yes, and thank you to the ReGEN Club for the invitation. So I will start to share my screen first. Hopefully you all can see my screen now.
Yes.
Yep. Good. So before we start, I wanted to ask a question to you. Raise your hand if you can smell electricity. So you can do the Teams hand raise or unmute yourself and say, can you smell electricity? Yes, you heard me right. Now, when I was growing up in India, I really believe, I was convinced that I could smell electricity. Growing up in India, we didn't have enough power. So we always had load shedding, as it was called. So the supply didn't meet enough to the demand. So we knew the set time when the power would go off in the evening, and we lived around that. When the power came on, I could smell a distinct burnt aroma in the air around me. And I thought for a very long time that was electricity coming back. And as soon as I could smell it, I would run around the house claiming, I know in the next few seconds we are going to get our power back. What was happening there? It was basically our neighbors blowing out their kerosene lamps all at the same time because the power came back in a structured manner, street by street. And the air or the wind blowing it into our houses. And I thought for a very long time that I could smell electricity. And that's my connection to being an electrical engineer now working in transmission, that I've not forgotten that this childhood anecdote, I never thought how important it would be. It was more of an engineering lesson for me where I was confusing the causation and correlation because I was thinking I could smell it. So that's electricity for you. Now, before I start on the topic, I thought I want to get the room to think about this. What image comes to your mind when I say the word decarbonization? Decarbonization. So if you go into slido.com, I have set this poll up and hopefully it should be an active poll now. Either you can use the QR code and type in grid unlocked, or if you want to unmute and speak up, that's also fine, whichever works for you. Can see responses coming back in. Yeah, it's about green landscapes, it's about solar panels, wind turbines, about electrification, clean air. You can see a few more people typing. Wow, wind turbine seems to be the winner. The beautiful turbines that line our shores and in our onshore and on land. Thank you. I see a few responses come in. So it is about the connection of renewables, solar, wind turbine, oil, electrification, be it homes, transport. But we often don't think or discuss enough about the indispensable part of this jigsaw, the key enabler, the critical backbone of it all, and that is the grid. Now, the transmission grid takes the power from where it's generated to where it's needed. You can link that as the motorways of the electricity network. And then the distribution network takes it as the smaller A and B roads. So the importance of grid in order to decarbonize is, I don't think, is talked about enough. It's only in recent times that we have been talking about it a bit more because the electricity grid is what interconnects the power plants and through the transmission power lines, the control centers, and powers our homes and our industries. It literally keeps the lights on, which we take for granted sometimes. Now, today, during the session here, I'll be taking you through a journey to help you understand what does the future of grid look like to meet the decarbonization and net zero targets. And I'm hoping that by the end of the session, the gridlock will become unlocked for you. Now, before I go into the details, let me add a bit more of my background. So, yes, mentioned I work as a technical innovation manager, and that's within the transmission, SSEN Transmission company, which is owned by the SSE Group. So, we are part of the SSE parent company, which is a FTSE listed company. And we are partly funded by Ontario Teachers Pension Plan as well. So 25% of the stake is owned by the pension plan company, and then 75 is owned by SSE Group. And the transmission grid from the north of Scotland, in the Highlands and the Islands, is basically owned and operated by SSEN Transmission. So you can see in the map there some of the existing infrastructure and what is on some of it, what's under construction. I'll cover that in a bit more detail a bit later. And so, in terms of working relationship, we work very closely with the National Energy System Operator, who looks at how the grid needs to increase, the capacity needs to increase in order to meet the net zero targets. And by 2050, we are hoping to connect about 50 gigawatt of renewable energy to help deliver net zero for UK, for the GB grid, basically. And currently, the capacity is around 9 to 10 gigawatts of renewable generation is connected. So for that, there's huge investment plan going through within the region, which means jobs, creation of jobs, especially in Scotland as well. So that's a bit about us. And this is more of an infographic to make it simpler for you. So the generation is where the power is generated. It goes through, if it's an offshore wind turbine, some of it is converted through DC connection. So HVDC comes into a converter station, which converts that into a alternating current and a HAC current, and which is then transferred through pylons you see on the screen there into our homes and factories or power requirement areas through the distribution grid. So that's a bit about us. And now looking at how we are going to look at it. Now, one of my childhood heroes, Dr. Carl Sagan, he famously said, "You need to know the past to understand the present." And then I add to that that you have to understand the past to understand the present, but then you also need to then look at, plan the future. So today, through this journey, we will be setting the scene on where we came from, how we have arrived here, and then what does that mean for the current grid, and what does that mean for the future grid as well. And through that, we'll be looking at the GB context part of it, because then that brings that really home into what's happening in our island around us and makes it more personal. Now, this is a bit looking back at in time. Now, this is the global CO2 concentration over a period of 100,000 of years. So you can see this. It's a very famous chart, but the reason I'm putting it here is because how important it is. If you look at the global CO2 temperature concentration, that's basically analyzed by looking at the air core samples from ice, air samples from ice cores, basically. And from that, it's like a time machine going back in time by analyzing that. You can see it's a more cyclical journey, and that's more linked to the Milankovitch cycles. But then, with the advent of Homo sapiens, still that continues. But then, when industrial revolution starts, the CO2 level shoots up on an exponential path. So over the past, um, post-industrial era, you can see that that chart and that slope has been quite significant, which means that's something that we need to be aware of and take an action on. And this is again in terms of what does that mean in terms of the CO2. What does that imply is the temperature increases because it's a greenhouse gas. And you can see here, it's a nice chart. If I can forward it to a bit, it charts the greenhouse gas emissions from the prehistoric era, and you can see over time it has been significantly increasing, and the current increase is about 1.35 degrees Celsius, which is, when we think about it, we are thinking, oh, it's only in points or 1 degrees, but the effect that has on the sea ocean temperature, water temperature, and the corals being becoming extinct, and all the impact it has in terms of extreme weather conditions, that's hugely significant. Um, so it's important that we need to take an action on it. Now, if we look at, that's the past, if we look at the current day context, over time, we have seen loads of news in the news, extreme heat weather, farmers trying to save their crops, droughts everywhere, volatile weather, and a lot of people being impacted by climate-related disasters. So the question comes, in terms of, we know this is happening now, but what are we doing about it? If you look at the next picture, raise your hands if you have seen this moment and you know when this has been. Now, I have just realized it does say the back, but go on, Jason. Jason and Eric have held their hand up. Do you want to shout out? It's the
No,
COP
go ahead. I
21.
mean, yeah.
Yeah. It is a significant time in our, it's a landmark achievement that we achieved, where every country agreed to work together on three primary objectives. Firstly, was to limit the global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius. Secondly, to adapt to the impacts of changing climate. And thirdly, to make finance available, or to make money available to deal with this crisis. So that's a key enabler again, so that the global north takes onto account to support the global south. So this shows that when we come together uh, as countries, we can achieve significant tasks. We can come into agreements. And on the back of that, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, they produced a report in 2018, showing what does that 1.5-degree warmer world look like and the possible pathways to cut the emissions to stabilize the Earth's climate. Now, it's not an easy task, and it takes a lot of collaboration to achieve this Herculean effort. So, the question is, what are we doing from in terms of policy or pledges? Where do you translate that? And that's where within the UK we have legally binding targets to achieve net zero by 2050 in terms of the whole UK, and then each of the smaller regions have their own targets. So Scotland, having a larger landmass and being able to do a lot of forestation, has a target of net zero by 2045, whereas Wales has a target of reaching 95% of net zero reduction in emission by 2050. Now, this is all based on the advice from UK Committee for Climate Change, which was established under the Climate Change Act in 2008. And that sets the scene in terms of the carbon budgets. Now, the seventh carbon budget was released last year, which has produced this rainbow chart, which is quite phenomenal because it gives us a good account of what's the current greenhouse gas emission in the UK. And from that, if we have to reach to zero, where there's a pot of gold basically, and by 2050, if we have to reach to zero, what are the measures we have to do? And if we do nothing, that's where the trajectory ends. So it shows a significant way or makes it more practicable in terms of how can people like you and me be able to support it. Now it's about that the journey that we need to be on. So if I talk through the strips, each of them as they are on the screen, starting from the top, the purple ones, they are about reducing our demand. So it's like reducing the demand on highly carbon intensive things like consuming less red meat or using less flights, and it could also mean increasing efficiency, so getting more from less, so insulating our homes or being more comfortable by using less energy overall, so reducing that demands aspects of it. Now, what is important is this purple side is important in the short term because you can say it makes by 2030 it makes a significant impact, but over the long term it remains constant because you can only reduce it to so much, and then the impact reduces. Then moving on is the second bit, which is what we are primarily here discussing about, the electrification side, is consuming up low carbon solutions. That's the yellow bit here, and it's adapting low carbon technologies. It could be electric cars or heat pumps to keep us warm in the future, or it will also include hydrogen or carbon capture. So you can see that the biggest wedge that's taking all the heavy lift is the electrification wedge, and it is the important part of UK's strategy overall. And that's reducing our consumption of fossil fuels, particularly in transport. And then as we go into the next elements is about reducing the fuel and the carbon capture, sorry, comes in here. It's about expanding our supplies of low carbon electricity. And then to finish off is that nature bit where we are looking at increasing the forestation or having more peatlands, restoring more peatlands. And finally is the engineered removal. So that's like getting to the net zero by getting rid of the emissions that are in the atmosphere. So it's like actively removing the carbon dioxide by either by planting the plants, planting trees, or planting energy crops, which can then be used in carbon capture or storage electricity. So kind of the biofuel with carbon capture included, or to to bury them under the sea permanently. So that's that engineered removal part of it that comes into the last bit to attain the net zero. So before we move on into what that means for the grid, I would like to open up to the floor to check, are there any questions people have at this point? And looking at the history, what does that mean in terms of the carbon budget before we look at the impact on grid? Any questions? Happy to open the floor out. Yeah, go on, Jason.
Hi there. Maybe I'll just give a little bit of an intro myself. I'm currently working at a UK energy company called RES. And of course, I've came up with SSEN quite a lot from work, but also from other conference. My question for you is, I'm curious about your take on hydrogen and how does the transmission innovation keep up with such low carbon supply?
Yeah, sure. So hydrogen is an evolving vector within the energy industry. There's a lot of research being done. I know one of the member of the audience, Priya, if she's still there, she is actually working quite closely in the hydrogen sector. So within transmission, we are not stipulating what energy sources we will connect to. What we are doing is to be able to support the demands, because when I come into a bit into the grid stability side or the future of the grid, storing energy from the intermittent sources is very important, and hydrogen plays a role there, because then when there is excess power, you can convert that into hydrogen gas for it to be consumed later when you want electricity to be produced from it. So I think that there's a lot of debates, or there's a lot of, I guess to put it rightly, a lot of research still needs to be done to make it more viable, but the industry is moving in that direction. And so in the future, hopefully we'll have it there. If Priya is around, if she wants to add some more, because I know she's working in that field, I don't mind having a conversation here rather than me being the only one speaking.
I'm afraid Priya has left the room, but she might join back. But
Sure.
Eric has raised her hand, so
Yeah.
go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, hi. Just quickly, because I've quite a bit of experience on the technical side. I'm a petroleum engineer by background, working in project managing the electrification of the northeast of Scotland at the moment with Balfour Beatty. But I've done a lot of analysis on hydrogen and energy for Aberdeen Climate Action. And the issue with hydrogen is the thermodynamics. So hydrogen will be a niche solution, as in there are specific things you can do with hydrogen for which there are few alternatives. And long-term storage is one of them, but there are quite a few hiccups along the way. Some of them are basic thermodynamics, as in to use hydrogen in any reasonable way, you need to compress it. That costs a lot of energy. You don't get the energy back. So that's a cycle. To produce it, that's quite an inefficient process. And there are steps to make that more efficient. But for now, there are no processes that are highly efficient that can be seen at this point to be, industry worthy, industrial scale up worthy. They might be, but at the moment they're not. And then there's an additional issue, which is that hydrogen is actually quite a powerful greenhouse gas. So, and because hydrogen is such a small molecule, that's one of the things that makes it quite difficult to transport. So all the talk about transporting hydrogen through the gas network has a lot of difficulties because it actually seeps through quite a lot of the pipework in the end. It'll remain a niche.
Yeah.
It'll remain a niche, I think. But whether the niche is a big or a small one, that's not to say that there is, of course, industrial use for hydrogen, which takes up currently about 4% of global emission source. And replacing that with electrically generated hydrogen is, of course, a really valuable step to take. But whether that will be making use of the intermittency of renewables, that's a little bit, chicken and egg thing. Because if you do that, then you need storage. If you need storage, you need compression, and then so the cycle goes on. Whereas For industrial usage, typically the usage is a continuous cycle, so you need a continuous power supply to produce that. But taking that only the industrial capacity away, that's about 4% of global emissions. So that in itself would be a valuable target, but that bears no relation to the hype that hydrogen has had as this great big magic fuel, and the fossil fuel industry promoting hydrogen as a gas replacement in order to spike it in, which was mainly driven by the political desire to maintain burning of gas in the gas network. So there's a whole bunch of political streams through it, and yeah, I'd say it's a niche solution, and those niches may get bigger or smaller, but a lot of the hype is based around political drivers, largely founded in the oil industry. Disappointingly.
Cool. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for the elaborate answer. Cool. So if we now look at what does that mean for the grid, because we understood that electrification is a key part of the wedge that's going to take the big load for net zero. So there has been few changes within the current kind of political side, and we have now Chris Stark, who was previously leading the Committee for Climate Change, now leading the mission control for delivering the clean power by 2030. And so Clean Power 2030 is a mission whereby by 95% of the electricity generated would be from clean sources by 2030. And that's that it was previously 2035 a couple of years ago. So it's now brought forward by 5 years. So that acceleration means there's an need within the industry to be able to deliver at pace and at scale. So when we look back again at the seventh carbon budget, and in terms of the grid, the generation changes its structure. So we see here, this is from the seventh carbon budget again, which is talking about what does the generation mix looks like. So if you look at starting from the top, where we are right now, there is a bit about the unabated gas. So these are the gas turbines, the thermal power plants that are connected to a grid. And over time, you see that the unabated gas is reducing quite significantly. And by 2030, it's becoming quite insignificant within the grand mix of the energy generation or power generation. Then comes the purple bit, which is solar, and followed by onshore and offshore wind, which is taking the big lift. And there's also the low carbon dispatchable power, which is the bioenergy, the carbon capture of bioenergy. So basically, biofuels are burned, but then the gas emitted from it, rather than being sent to the atmosphere or released to the atmosphere, it is captured into carbon capture and storage solutions. So that makes it, again, a more green option. And that's followed by the blue bit, which is the nuclear. That's a firm power that will be keeping the grid operational, and then followed by the other generation, which also includes imports, which is at a steady state, which we would be taking in. So you can see that the renewables will be taking a lot of lift here. So the Clean Power Action Plan has been released by Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, which is now taking that into a new era within our electricity sector. So that's the impact on the grid, where we are seeing the change in what the generation is connected to. The next section is about the future of the grid. What does that mean in terms of the future of the grid? So I'll talk about it in terms of 4 Ds: the decarbonization, decentralization, democratization, and digitization. And let's decode each of the Ds in its own way. And these are the Ds that pave the way for our net zero goal. So the first D is the decarbonization D. which is eliminating the carbon-based fuels for electricity generation and adding more renewables into the grid. Now, that does create a challenge in terms of what do we do if the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. It creates a problem whether when balancing the supply to the demand of especially when the supply is intermittent in source, how do we do that? Though in order to meet the net zero targets, it's very essential for us to have that increased renewable connection. And we can balance that by having the short term and long term storage solutions, which Eric has briefly mentioned about. Now let's get a bit more warmed up, and I have a slider for poll for you again. Could you go back into Slido and take a guess on what was the largest source of electricity last year? You want to put your answers in? Yeah, wind is leading, shortly behind is coal and gas. Cool. I think we have 19 members on this call, or 18 if I'm not typing. So let's have some more votes if possible, or else we'll look at what the answer is to this quiz.
Feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Yeah.
Is this for the UK or just globally?
UK.
The
This
UK,
is for
okay.
UK. Yeah.
Right. I'd also guess wind, I suppose, or gas.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Wind looks to be the winner. So in terms of coal, we had the last coal plant decommissioned last year. So that's no longer in the energy mix now. But wind is definitely the winner. So if I show you the league table, you can see over the last 25 years or so, you can see the top has been the like coal, which was top in the league and then has slowly come down. Green one is a nuclear, which has stayed quite steady. And then the one at the bottom, wind, which was tailing in the lead, is now higher up, taking the number one position. So, and this is the mix for last year, particularly, wherein wind was just by slightly outweighed the gas last year. So that was kind of a tipping point. Wherein from July 24 to June 25, the wind was quite, contributing quite high into the generation side. So we are on that pathway, that is to say, of decarbonizing the generation side. Now, if we look at the next D, which is the decentralization of it. So decentralization is basically moving the electricity generation away from the large centralized steam turbines into a more distributed systems with many small renewable generators. So it could be solar on our rooftops or wind turbines connected to the grid. Now, even if the large steam turbines were harmful to the environment, they did offer us quite a lot, especially from Newton's first law of motion, which is inertia. So it provided that inertia to the grid with the large rotating mass it had and provided that essential reactive power, making the frequency stabilization quite easy. Now, when these have been disconnected from or when these are disconnected from the grid, it creates challenges in terms of having the frequency being stabilized. We do have solutions, engineered solutions, which we are able to compensate for that. For example, we can have more capacitors installed in series, static VAR compensators, which don't have any mechanical compensation or motion, but they give that reactive power back into the grid. And also either have synchronous generators, which is again large turbines that have moving parts, a flywheel, which takes up power from the grid, but then gives that inertia back into the grid. And so all these provide that essential inertia back into the grid to stabilize that frequency, but not generate the power. So that's where that decentralization, where producers are becoming consumers, the procurers become part of it. It's how do we manage that? That's a complexity in itself and leads to a lot of important design solutions being designed into it. Now, if we come to the third D, is decentralization. We talked about. The third D is democratization. It basically facilitates the access to power as well as the flexibility to choose the source of power and creating that equitable access to energy, similar to the ethos of ReGEN Club, wherein the motto being everybody should have access to clean, reliable, affordable power to be able to consume that. Fuel poverty is still quite prevalent, especially in the north of Highlands, where fuel poverty is very prominent. So providing that cost effectiveness, the flexibility, and giving that ability for people to use the renewable power even more is important. And with the renewable industry picking up at pace, we are now finding that these projects are becoming more viable, which is meaning that they are becoming more affordable. For the consumers. So there's loads of innovations going on, driving that access to clean power by having more storage, giving the consumers or producers being able to store the energy and then drive small scale storage there will help revolutionize this further. But there are a lot of projects from the National Energy System Operator, NESO, to be able to create that democratized, affordable energy solution. So that is about the democratization of the grid. And the final D is digitization, which is a key enabler, which is frequently being talked about, being able to make the decisions and having the right data to be able to make them at the right time. It's about that complete system management. Now, I relate this to walking at the cliff edge blindfolded. If we don't know where we are going, we will easily trip ourselves up and have a disaster or a catastrophic one. Hence, the need to have that data to be able to make those decisions, to be able to revolutionize what we will be doing and increasing the productivity and efficiency all goes hand in hand. Now, as an innovation manager, one of the key projects I have delivered over the last year is a digital substation. So, digital substation is basically digitizing the protection and control automation system of within a substation, and creating that network where more data can be transferred, right, and digitizing it right at the source in the primary plant yard into the control room and into the back-end office, going into the back-end office. So there's more visibility of what is happening to the assets that we have installed in the substation. Over time, with the data collected, we can develop more situational awareness in terms of developing proactive maintenance program, and also the carbon footprint in itself, because of the size of the substation, shrinks by half by having a more fiber based solution here in a digital substation. Because in a conventional site, the primary plant is connected to the control room is a point-to-point connection to give that enough redundancy at scale. So when you don't have these multi-core cables that are going all around your substation compound and the data is driven through fiber optic cable, it really rationalizes the size of the cable trenches and can be delivered through cable troughs, which means the control room becomes half, the substation size is really optimized, and it delivers more for the consumers. So better value by having projects delivered in a cheaper way. So that's about that digitization, which is a core enabler of it all as well, and is critical in meeting the net zero pathway. Now let's go into a Slido poll again before we go into questions. Which D do you think is most influential? Now, there's no right or wrong answer. It is more of a perception, and just so that I can understand the audience pulse in terms of what D do you think is the most influential? And feel free to unmute if you are not able to access Slido. It's the decarbonization, which is eliminating the fossil fuels, digitization, which is data-driven decisions, decentralization, which is dispersed then generation and prosumers, so procurement and producers and consumers becoming combined, and then democratization, which is access and flexibility to equitable energy. I'm conscious of the time. Maybe we'll move on, crack swiftly. So any questions on any of the 4Ds before we go into what does that mean in terms of creating that security and flexibility? Cool. So it looks like most people are giving a lot of importance to decarbonization, which is eliminating the fossil fuels and having more renewable generation, which is awesome to see. The next bit is about what does that mean in terms of, so we talked like many people had voted for the decarbonization side, but what do we do when sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow? There are several ways to manage that in current scenarios. And first of all is about that demand side response. So encouraging behaviors to be able to encourage less consumption. So incentivizing the use of clean and cheap power. For example, there have been several alerts in recent times wherein your utility provider would tell you if you consume during this time or consume less during this time, then we will give you more credits or incentivizing the consumer behavior to lead to that. There have been events in California a couple of years ago where they have averted a grid collapse because it was really hot temperatures and people were using a lot of air conditioners, which meant the demand went up. But if they did not take control and ask people to change the behaviors by reducing, using less power by changing the temperatures on their air conditioners to be less cold, making it less cooler, all that helped them avert that grid failure, which is a famous case study for us to understand what can demand side flexibility, demand side response to. But at the same time, it is important not to create that fatigue for the consumers, because if you ask them to do it too many times, it causes that action fatigue, which is no longer creates that impact. The next part is the storage, which we have briefly mentioned earlier. So having the short-term storage using battery energy storage systems. So these range from 1 kilowatt to 100 megawatts. But then we know about batteries. They have lifetime issues and memory, cell degradation over time. But that is in the short term, that is a key part of where we are getting a lot of connection into the grid to manage that peak demand side and being able to deliver the generation when it's needed. The second one is the medium storage solutions, which is pumped hydro. So when there is excess power, water is pumped into a high reservoir and then can be used to through the penstock when power is needed. We SSE Renewables does have a project in Corrie Glass, which is Loch Lochy, which has been a significant one. After 30 years, Scotland is building another hydroelectric project. It is a 1 gigawatt um, program, which, and for that, transmission grid is going to be upgraded to have new switching station, a new substation, and overhead lines, 400 kV overhead line to connect that. But with pump storage comes the geographical factor. Like we can only have it where there is a elevation difference. So there is a constraint there. And the final bit in terms of storage is the longer term solution where hydrogen is being pitched as a power to gas storage solution. In terms of efficiency, if you look at pump storage, it has about 76% efficiency, whereas hydrogen only has about 40 to 50% efficiency. So you're losing a lot of power by using that storage solution. And the final bit is the interconnectors. Because we live in an island, we do share electricity from the mainland grid, mainland Europe, and we do have a few interconnectors, and there are new ones being planned for the future to keep that resilience, because mainland Europe is also on the same pathway of having a more decarbonized energy solution. So creating that flexibility to be able to transfer power from the island to the mainland and likewise buy when needed creates that security of supply for the GB grid. Now, the final bit is the GB context, which I will cover quite quickly. When we look at the current grid, it's divided into, the transmission grid is divided into 3 sections. So SSEN transmission, the north of Scotland. In the central belt, Scotland, we have Scottish Power, and then National Grid is operating in England. And it's about 132 kV, 275 kV, and 400 kV are the power networks. So these are some statistics on what the current grid looks like. I think I'm conscious of the time. There is a video here, but possibly I will send it across and then people can play it in their own time. What it talks about is based on the networks option, the scale of growth that is going in, which I can talk you through briefly. So you see here the pathways to 2050, which is released by the National Energy System Operator, and shows that the future energy scenarios, and talks through a few scenarios like where people transition, that's a holistic transition, there's more electrical engagement, hydrogen evolution is now part of one of the scenarios, and counterfactual is when we don't do anything, like they don't take any steps to be able to participate in this. So you can see by 2050, the hope is that we will be connecting about 50 gigawatt of power into the grid. So Scotland will become more of a producer and England will become more of the consumer. So the net transfer will always be southward to keep the net supply of electricity there. So there's loads of growth drivers in terms of the future grid. There's ambition to scale it up. So it's increasing, the current grid is increasing by about 3 times. So we need to build 3 times the infrastructure what we have built in the last 30 years in the next 6 years. So that's a scale of growth we are going through right now. These are some of the projects we are working on. And so the lines are basically the overhead cables that go, or subsea networks that go underground or overhead cables basically, and then the dots are the substations that are coming in to connect it all. So this is another view. It's a bit older one, but shows the scale of growth basically through the network. And to conclude, the grid is growing at a very phenomenal pace, and that means that we need to accelerate to deliver it. There's things like the offshore grid also being looked into, the oil and gas offshore converter projects, so then the offshore platforms can be decarbonized, and then increased electrification as well. So as a business, in 2013, there were about 100 employees, and we are hoping to be about, currently we are about 2,800, and in the next 5 years, it will be 3,000 mark round. So a lot of growth to deliver these projects. And with that also means we have to look internally, and we have science-based targets. We have one of the key greenhouse gas that as our operations assets emit is SF6, because the greenhouse gas equivalence of it is 24,000 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So if it's leaked, it's quite significantly dangerous. Hence, we are going into other solutions provided. That concludes at a very rapid pace the final part. And I am keen to summarize it all. So we looked at the past, where we came from, the net zero strategy, why is needed and what it means for the UK, our transmission grid, especially focusing on what's happening in the UK region, and what that doesn't mean in terms of opportunity and growth. That's my final slide.
Wow, that's fascinating, Vinny. Thanks a lot. While you were presenting, I got a message saying someone in the room, she was doing a course that's directly relevant to what you shared. So yeah, no, thanks a lot for spending your valuable time with us. We'll open the room for 5 minutes for a few questions, and I'm sure you can personally reach out to Minnie to know more if need be. It's quite interesting how you mentioned about, the scale of it, 3 times the scale in the past 30 years, in the next 6 years. That's quite interesting. And I think as young professionals in the room, we got a lot of things going on, which is nice. Right, we got a couple hands raised. So I'll just start with Santiago. Go ahead, bud.
Hi, everyone. Santiago, nice to meet you, Minnie. Thanks for the presentation. I work as a wind engineer for WSP. I have quite a broad question. So we discussed how wind accounts for roughly 30% of the UK power generation, and Scotland is clearly one of the biggest hubs where onshore wind infrastructure is being built. But you mentioned also that the demand is mainly located down south, which is kind of a modern centralization of the generation. So my question is, what do you see as a main challenge when moving such a big amount of power across these distances, but not only from a technical perspective, but also in terms of the integration with the other transmission operators to actually successfully transfer all this power down south?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. And that's where constraints come in, the boundary constraints, for example. So there's a lot being done in terms of visualizing that data. For example, there's been an innovation project to be able to give the public or more people more access to where do the constraints lie. So there's a React project, if you want to look up on the SSE Transmission site, which was looking at, visualizing that constraint. Because again, as you say, we have to transfer the power to Scottish Power's territory, and then from Scottish Power goes into England, National Grid's territory. So it's a bit of how do you make sure that, and it's only a finite number of lines that we have across the borders where the constraints are. It's called the B6 boundary, which is the constraint between us and Scottish Power, and that's one of UK's most constrained areas currently, and with that means like it's not just the 2030 projects we are doing. There's a lot being discussed for future as well, like beyond 2030 is already being discussed because those constraints are quite real. Some of the other things that we are also looking at, for example, you said about the load, there is increased policy encouragement to connect the loads back into Scotland. For example, the AI data centers, they will be coming up soon. And we are already seeing applications coming through for data centers to connect in Scotland. So incentivizing demand hubs to connect where the power is generated, so then you don't have to transfer it down south. But whereas some of the traditional industry, which has been Midlands based, I guess it's quite difficult to relocate them at a short period, because it's all workforce. You have loads of socio-economic things you need to consider before doing that aspect. But very good question. Constraints is a key area being looked into, and yeah, if there are ideas you have, happy to discuss them as well.
Thank you, Minnie. Really appreciate your time on the reply.
Cheers for that. Next up, Timmy.
Hi, Mary, and hi, everyone. Thanks for the presentation today. And just a quick intro on myself. I studied same degree as you by background, and I serve as like a product engineer right now within more of the renewable generation space. And as someone who also used to work for SSE, I know the amount of like investments that that goes into network operations, both at distribution and transmission level. And you're just wondering, now that I'm kind of on the other side of the fence, where you're looking to sort of connect renewable generation, both solar, wind, or storage, and then you're faced with the hiccup of NISA gets 2, gets 1, phase 2, all of that. Is there a way we can have a lot of the grid works and reinforcement done quicker? And I won't say money is the constraint, because there's definitely money. So what would you say is actually, the hiccup or the constraint that we're facing right now that would prevent, or that is preventing us from sort of deploying a lot of those reinforcement works quicker? That's my question.
It's threefold actually. The issue or the bottlenecks or the constraints we have as a business to be able to deliver it quicker. First, I'll talk about the enablers. So there's been, from Ofgem's perspective, accelerated strategic investment plans have been released, wherein in the past a project would be about 14 years. Half of that time is for planning and consenting. Now they have squeezed that into less than 7 years and said planning and consenting needs to be squeezed down, and working with the communities needs to be done at a quicker pace to be able to deliver it, because there's only so much you can do in terms of construction times, because that's like engineering governed and you have to have those periods of work, but it's that front end funnel that's being optimized. But as an industry, we are seeing three challenges primarily. Would say firstly is supply chain. It's not just GB or UK that is scaling up the transmission network. It's all over the world, starting from Middle East, Europe, America. You see it across the world. So the supply chain, some of the critical equipment is only manufactured by 2 or 3 or 4 vendors, and their factory has been booked for years now based on the contracts in place. So supply chain constraint is quite a critical factor. Secondly, resources. Again, skills available to support the sector is finite. So when we are recruiting, we are losing from a supply base, possibly. So it's how do we manage that skills constraint to make sure that the whole industry can increase their workforce without pinching Paul to pay Peter, for example. And thirdly is that acceleration in terms of consenting and planning. It is not an easy task to bring communities with us, and we're working extremely closely with our communities to make sure they understand the economic benefits of bringing programs at the scale and the boost in the local economy, not just from jobs, but local contracts, community funds, and all that plays into a picture. So those are the key areas, I would say, Timmy, on that. But good question. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that. Next up, Stiti.
Hello, Mini. Thank you for the presentation, because it's very, very good for me to get to know a lot of information. I just have one question about the connectivity, because that is part of my research that I did for my PhD last time. So because I have spoken to many company last time, and they say that the problem with our connectivity in the transmission system is we have a lot of massive backlog. Mean that yes, we can generate power from the solar, from the wind, but the problem is the transmission, there's no connectivity to our transmission, and also they have to wait for the new substation to be built or for the transformer to be built, and it costs them a lot of money, and for the waiting time it takes about 4 years to 5 years. So what do you think that the transmission or SSEN can do in order to improve or to speed up this kind of problem?
Yeah, it's a very valid issue the industry is facing right now. There has been a connection reform launched recently. So in the past, when a connection application was received by us, it's around who was responded first needs to be connected first. Whereas now they're becoming more around who is ready first. Let's connect them first, because there are loads of zombie projects within the queue which are actually causing the other projects not to be able to connect because of the way the previous process was run. So it's changing or adapting to the situation we are now in and bringing policy to be able to connect them quicker. We have a whole team or a whole directorate, I would say, to looking at the connection reform and being able to support the government on that. So that's a key area to be looked into. But again, optimization can be done. And it's not an easy answer. There's no golden bullet to strike there. But, as an industry working closely with Ofgem and the system operator to be able to kind of reduce some of the queues and reduce the connection times by forecasting the growth ahead, because UK went through a period where grid did not get any significant fund like upgrade, and that's why it's all come to this period where we have to really grow quickly to meet the current demands, which is a Herculean task, and that's why the scale and growth comes with it. So it's an opportunity and challenge in itself. Thank you.
Thank you. We are way past time, but we got two more questions for us in the room. Feel free to leave if you got other commitments. Totally understandable. Next up is AC. Feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. So very nice meeting you all. So my name is Anakha and I work for Mott McDonald as an electrical engineer in the water sector. So my question is around, so as you have worked in like multiple disciplines and multiple sectors, so what do you think is a main key skill for an electrical engineer from an adjacent sector to transition into a key energy role? And what do you think is the best entry point, or what are the gaps that needs bridging?
Mm-hmm. A good question and a very relevant one, because at the moment we are working hard to encourage people from other sectors to enter the transmission or utility industry because of the key demand in the sector. There are several pathways. I guess being an experienced professional, I'll tailor it to your situation so that it makes it more impactful for you and answers your question. We have, when loads of applications go or jobs go through the portal, and we encourage people from other disciplines to apply, because in the end it's about the transferable skills. You have the core knowledge and nothing changes in the electricity flow or the challenges or losses you have. So yeah, I think technically you would have all the right skills. It's more about showing your passion through your CV or through your covering letters to make it clear why you are passionate to join the sector, because that counts a lot, because we are looking for it all, as a business, most businesses want people who are ready, want to come learn and deliver. So, and there'll always be learning, which we are like as a business, we will be fully flexible, supportive of, because learning is always a good thing. So.
Thank you so much.
That was a great question. Next, Esteban, and this will be the last one.
To everyone, and Halmini, pleased to meet you, and thank you for this presentation. I'm an electrical engineer, and I completed a master's degree in renewable energy and smart grid. My question is regarding the current energy infrastructure. Sorry, in your opinion, to get net zero or the decarbonization goals faster, would it be better or more useful to construct new energy infrastructure, or to leverage as much as possible the current infrastructure, or a combination of both options?
Thank you, Esteban. It is a combination of both options, to be honest, because we are looking at how can we sweat our current assets as much as possible. So maximizing the use of our current assets, so increasing their lifetime and only needing to replace them when they really are needed in terms of asset replacement policies. At the same time as how do we connect them quicker, so or new infrastructure quicker. So it's a kind of a current like working challenge that we try and adopt, and that's constantly on our radar is how do we maximize our current assets but at the same time connect quickly into the network. So it's a mix of both, and both are important to be able to deliver at pace and at scale, I would say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Minnie, on behalf of everyone here in the room and people who have left, thanks a lot for your time. Your lecture and the discussion surrounding it, this is exactly what ReGEN stands for. So no, really appreciate your time. Before we close, very quickly, we just want to share a teaser of what's coming up next. It's going to be our first in-person ReGEN series, and it focuses both on technical track, as I mentioned earlier, as well as the leadership track. So more on that. Santiago.
Yeah, I'll still screen for just 2 seconds. So as I said, my name's Santiago. I work for WSP as a renewable energy engineer. I've been working in consultancy for the past 5 years. And I'm delighted to announce the next workshop, which is Wind Farm Design 101, from the map to the meeting room. I guess when I finished university, I would have loved someone to help me bridge like the gap between everything I learn and how to apply it, not just from a technical perspective, but also dealing with things that nobody warns you about, dealing with clients, managing stakeholders, and essentially all the stuff that comes real just when you actually get into a job. So if you're finishing your degree or you're early in your career and you're interested in the wind energy sector, this workshop is for you. We'll work through the key phases of a typical wind farm project as a team with a hands-on exercise in a way that is designed to close that gap between the knowledge you have from your master's or from your degree and the impact you can make with that knowledge. As Jazz said, this one's happening in person in Manchester. We still need to confirm the details of the location, so keep an eye on our WhatsApp community. If you've not joined yet, please scan the QR code, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks again, Minnie, for the content, the presentation, and I'll leave the QR code there for people to scan it and join us.
That's us, everyone. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
The invite.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks
Bye.
all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Minnie. Really
Thank you. I wasn't sure. Cool. I think it
can
went.
go home and rest.
Sorry?
Now that is now time to rest. Thank you very much
Cool.
for the time.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.
Bye.